The studio lights shimmered across the skyline of New York City, spilling over polished glass and camera rigs as another primetime broadcast prepared to begin. Tonight's guest was not just a former First Lady, she was Melania Trump, a woman whose elegance had often been mistaken for silence. Producers moved briskly behind the scenes. Microphones were tested, lights adjusted, cue cards shuffled. The audience buzzed with curiosity. Everyone knew the host, Alex Grant, sharp, handsome, and dangerously quick with his tongue. His interviews were known less for honesty and more for humiliation, a blend of sarcasm and spectacle that kept ratings high and egos bruised. Trump sat quietly among the audience, disguised by a dark suit and an expression of calm vigilance. He wasn't used to sitting still while others took the spotlight, but tonight was different. This was Melania's night, her interview, her words. He had promised not to interfere unless it became necessary. Alex walked across the stage, his confident stride echoing through the studio. Cameras turned. The crowd applauded. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with a smirk, "tonight we have a woman who has seen the world from a golden tower and the White House, the one and only Melania Trump." Applause filled the air as Melania stepped gracefully onto the stage. She wore a tailored cream suit, understated yet commanding. Her expression was poised, her steps deliberate. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that revealed nothing and promised everything. Alex extended his hand. "Mrs. Trump," he said, "thank you for gracing us with your presence." "Thank you," she replied softly, her accent gentle yet unmistakably firm. They took their seats across from each other, the stage lights framing them like two actors in a play, one poised, one predatory. Alex leaned back in his chair, pen in hand. "You've often been called the quiet First Lady," he began. "Some say too quiet. Do you ever feel you should have spoken more when your husband was, let's say, being his usual self?" The audience chuckled. Trump's eyes narrowed from the shadows. Melania didn't flinch. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than words," she said simply. Alex grinned, sensing an opening. "Ah, yes, silence, that mysterious European mystique. But in America, we like people who talk. Do you think your silence helped or hurt your image?" Melania folded her hands neatly. "I do not live for image, Mr. Grant. I live for truth, and truth does not always need to shout." A few claps rippled through the audience, scattered but genuine. Alex noticed, and it bothered him. "So," he said with mock seriousness, "truth through silence. Interesting strategy. But do you think maybe it allowed people to see you as, well, a decorative figure? You were often called distant, even cold." The laughter that followed was polite but sharp. Melania looked at him, unblinking. "People often fear what they do not understand," she said. "Stillness is not coldness, it is strength." Trump's lips curved into the faintest smirk. He knew that tone, the one she used when she was not to be underestimated. Alex, still smirking, twirled his pen. "You certainly sound philosophical, but let's talk about your husband for a moment. Donald Trump, larger than life, louder than most. Some would say he sucked the oxygen out of every room. How did you breathe?" The crowd laughed again. Melania paused, her eyes steady. "When you love someone, you do not need to compete for air," she replied. "You breathe together." A soft murmur ran through the audience. Alex's smile wavered for half a second. "Touching," he said dryly. "But come on, Mrs. Trump, be honest. You've seen him mocked, ridiculed, criticized. Do you ever agree with his critics?" Trump exhaled slowly from the audience, watching. He knew how cruelly questions could be framed, half-truths disguised as curiosity. Melania didn't flinch. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than words," she said simply. Alex grinned, sensing an opening. "Ah, yes, silence, that mysterious European mystique. But in America, we like people who talk. Do you think your silence helped or hurt your image?" Melania folded her hands neatly. I do not live for image, Mr. Grant. I live for truth, and truth does not always need to shout. A few claps rippled through the audience, scattered but genuine. Alex noticed, and it bothered him. So, he said with mock seriously, truth through silence. Interesting strategy. But do you think maybe it allowed people to see you as, well, a decorative figure? You were often called distant, even cold. The laughter that followed was polite but sharp. Melania looked at him, unblinking. People often fear what they do not understand, she said. Stillness is not coldness, it is strength. Trump's lips curved into the faintest smirk. He knew that tone, the one she used when she was not to be underestimated. Alex, still smirking, twirled his pen. You certainly sound philosophical. But let's talk about your husband for a moment. Donald Trump, larger than life, louder than most. Some would say he sucked the oxygen out of every room. How did you breathe? The crowd laughed again. Melania paused again, her eyes steady. When you love someone, you do not need to compete for air, she replied. You breathe together. A soft murmur ran through the audience. Alex's smile wavered for half a second. Touching, he said dryly. But come on, Mrs. Trump, be honest. You've seen him mocked, ridiculed, criticized. Do you ever agree with his critics? Trump exhaled slowly from the audience, watching. He knew how cruelly questions could be framed, half-truths disguised as curiosity. Melania tilted her head slightly. Critics are like shadows, she said. They follow you only when you stand in light. The audience applauded, louder this time. Even Alex seemed caught off guard. He forced a smile. That's poetic. Did you come up with that yourself, or does your husband write your lines? Melania's expression didn't change. I do not need anyone to write what I feel. Alex chuckled, trying to regain control. You're quick, I'll give you that. But let's get real. Many people think you stayed quiet because you didn't want to defend him. That maybe, deep down, you disagreed with him. Trump leaned forward slightly in his seat. He had seen this tactic before. Plant a seed of doubt, then smile while it grows. Melania met Alex's gaze. You mistake quiet for absence, she said. I was there. Every step, every storm. I chose my moments. Not because I was weak, but because I was watching. The audience hushed. Something in her tone carried authority, the kind that could not be rehearsed. Alex hesitated, flipping through his notes. All right, he said finally. Let's talk about the future. What's next for you? More speeches? A memoir, maybe? Or are you planning to return to your golden tower and stay silent again? The jab was obvious, the laughter predictable, but Melania didn't react. She simply looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, Silence is not retreat. Sometimes it is the beginning of understanding. The room fell quiet again. For the first time that night, Alex seemed unsure of himself. He cleared his throat and tried to laugh. Well, you're certainly full of surprises, Mrs. Trump. But tell me, do you think your husband ever feels overshadowed by your serenity? Melania's eyes softened, and for the briefest moment, she smiled. My husband is not overshadowed by anyone. He shines in his own way, and when he shines, I do not hide. I reflect. The audience applauded again. Trump, in the crowd, gave a small nod. Alex's grin faded. The rhythm of the interview, his rhythm, was slipping. Every line meant to mock her seemed to return, polished, sharper, stronger. He leaned closer, tone tightening. You know, Mrs. Trump, people say you were the most photographed First Lady, but the least known. Maybe that's the problem. Too much image, not enough substance. Do you have anything you really stand for? Melania's eyes didn't move. Yes, she said calmly, I stand for dignity, and I am beginning to think it is missing here tonight. The audience gasped. Trump smiled faintly, proud. Alex's smirk faltered. "Excuse me?" Melania's voice remained steady. "You invited me here to laugh, yes, to play your game of clever questions and shallow jokes. But laughter without kindness is cruelty, and cruelty never builds anything lasting." The crowd fell silent. A cameraman glanced at his producer. The air felt heavier now. Something had shifted. Trump, still seated in the audience, crossed his arms slowly. He knew that tone, too. It was the tone that said she was done being polite. Alex cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Mrs. Trump, I think we've—" But Melania raised a hand gently. "You asked if I stand for something, Mr. Grant. I stand for grace under fire. And if you listen, really listen, maybe you will understand why silence is sometimes the loudest answer." A pause, then applause. Stronger, longer, genuine. For the first time all evening, Alex Grant had nothing to say. From the audience, Trump leaned forward, his expression unreadable. He had promised to stay quiet, but deep down, he knew the night was far from over. The tension in the studio could be felt in every breath. The air conditioners hummed softly, unable to cool the heat of what had just unfolded. Melania's last words still echoed across the stage, like a calm, precise, and unforgettable. Alex Grant sat rigidly, his smile now a mere mask. He wasn't used to losing control. His entire reputation had been built on wit sharper than his guests could handle, on laughter that stung rather than soothed. But this time, his target didn't flinch. He took a slow sip of water, searching for composure. "Well," he said, his voice a shade tighter, "you certainly have a way with words, Mrs. Trump. Though I must say, that's not the Melania we usually see." Melania tilted her head slightly. "Perhaps you've been looking in the wrong direction." A few people chuckled softly, not at her, but at him. Alex's pen stilled. "So," he said, "you stand for dignity, for grace. But tell me this, where was that grace when your husband was, well, let's just say less than graceful?" Laughter broke out again, though not as loud this time. The audience was uncertain, sensing the fine line Alex was treading. Melania folded her hands. "Grace," she said softly, "is not agreement. It is endurance." Trump, watching from the audience, exhaled through his nose, a subtle sound of approval. He could see it happening, the shift, the tilt of power. Melania wasn't defending herself anymore. She was defining herself. Alex leaned forward, his smile returning with a glint of defiance. "So you endured him? That's what you're saying?" Melania's expression didn't change. "I endured the world judging him. There's a difference." The audience stirred. Someone clapped. One person, then two. The sound grew. Alex forced a laugh. All right, he said, waving his hand. "No need for applause. We're not here for campaign speeches." Melania simply looked at him. "You are here for mockery. I am here for truth. We both serve our purposes." Even Trump had to hide a grin. He leaned back in his seat, muttering under his breath, "That's my girl." Alex's jaw tightened. His producer, watching from the control booth, gestured for him to move on, but Alex wasn't ready to surrender. He switched tactics. "Let's talk image, Mrs. Trump. The media loved your fashion, your poise, but critics said you cared more about appearances than causes. Were they wrong?" Melania took a breath. "Image fades. Substance remains. If people remember me only for what I wore, then perhaps they were not listening closely." The audience clapped again, this time louder. Alex's pen tapped against his notepad, a nervous rhythm. He was losing them, and he knew it. So he went for the low blow. "Some people say," he began, voice slick with mock sympathy, "that the only reason the public still finds you interesting is because of your husband, that without him you'd be just another forgotten face in high society." Laughter rippled. this time sharper. The insult landed. Trump straightened in his seat. His eyes flashed. Melania, however, stayed perfectly still. She looked at Alex for a long, silent moment. Then she said, "Be careful, Mr. Grant. When you use someone's wife to insult their worth, you show more about yourself than about them." The laughter died instantly. Alex blinked. Melania continued, her voice steady, almost gentle. "I have stood beside my husband through storms most people cannot imagine. You see a name, a brand, a spectacle. I see the man who wakes up before dawn to fight for what he believes in. The man who takes every insult and turns it into fuel. You can mock him, but you cannot diminish him." The audience erupted in applause. Trump, in the crowd, felt something stir, not pride, but gratitude. He had given countless speeches in his life, but none hit harder than her quiet truth. Alex's cheeks flushed. He laughed awkwardly. "You're very loyal, Mrs. Trump," almost rehearsed. Melania's lips curved slightly. Loyalty does not need rehearsal. The audience laughed, this time at Alex. He forced another smile, trying to recover. "You've got quite the backbone tonight. Maybe your husband should be in the audience taking notes." The jab was reckless. The crowd gasped. Trump rose from his seat slowly. For a moment, cameras turned to him, unsure if this was planned. His figure loomed, calm but unmistakably commanding. Melania turned, startled, but Trump raised a reassuring hand. "It's all right," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "If the host wants to speak about me, he can do it to my face." The audience broke into nervous applause. Alex froze, caught between bravado and panic. The producers frantically gestured off stage, unsure whether to cut to commercial. Trump walked to the stage with measured steps, the way a lion might approach a cage door. He didn't need to hurry. The room was already his. Alex rose to his feet, forcing a grin. "Well, this is unexpected," he said. "Mr. Trump, welcome. I didn't know we had a surprise guest." Trump looked at him evenly. "Surprises make good television," he said, his tone smooth but edged. "But tonight's surprise is seeing how low some people will go for a laugh." The crowd roared, half in shock, half in delight. Trump turned toward Melania, his expression softening. "You handled yourself perfectly. You didn't need me, but since I'm here, I might as well say something." Alex swallowed. "By all means." Trump faced the audience. "You see, it's funny how people like Alex here think that mocking others makes them brave. They think that being clever is the same as being strong. But real strength," he glanced at Melania, "is sitting there with grace while the world tries to make you small." Applause filled the studio. Melania's eyes glistened faintly, though she said nothing. Trump continued, his voice steady. "I've been insulted by experts, mocked by professionals. But what they forget is that mockery doesn't build anything. It doesn't make the world better. Respect does." Alex opened his mouth, but Trump raised a hand. "Let me finish. You wanted to make her the punchline tonight. You thought you were clever, but she showed you what class looks like under pressure. That's something you can't fake, no matter how many cameras are on." The audience cheered loudly now, some even standing. Alex forced a laugh, but his eyes betrayed discomfort. "You really turned this around, didn't you?" Trump smiled faintly. "No, she did. I'm just the guy lucky enough to stand beside her." Melania reached for his hand, her poise unbroken, but her expression softer now. The audience applauded again, louder, sustained. The energy had completely shifted. The host's stage, once his fortress, now belonged to them. Trump leaned closer to Alex. "You wanted entertainment, right? Here it is. But sometimes the best show is when respect wins over ridicule." Alex had no response. The cameras zoomed in, on his awkward smile, on Trump's calm stare, on Melania's quiet strength. For a long, breathless moment, No one spoke. Then the applause rose again, thunderous, unstoppable. The producer's voice crackled through the headset. Cut to break, now. The lights dimmed, but the energy didn't fade. Trump and Melania stood together in the center of the stage, side by side, no longer interviewee and spouse, but equals in grace and defiance. Trump leaned in and whispered, "You handled him better than I ever could." Melania smiled faintly. "I learned from the best." He chuckled. "No, you just reminded everyone who the real strength in this family is." As the cameras powered down and the applause faded into murmurs, Alex Grant sat back in his chair, his confidence in pieces. Somewhere, deep inside, for the first time, he felt the sting of humility. The applause lingered even after the camera stopped rolling. Crew members exchanged glances. They'd never seen an interview end like this. What was supposed to be a light-hearted takedown had become something else entirely. A masterclass in composure, grace, and quiet power. Alex Grant sat frozen behind his desk, trying to maintain a smile that no longer fit. The producers avoided eye contact. The audience, still on their feet, continued clapping for Melania and Trump. When the lights dimmed, Melania stood and nodded politely to Alex. "Thank you for the invitation," she said, her tone neither bitter nor triumphant. Alex managed a stiff smile. "You certainly made an impression tonight, Mrs. Trump." Trump placed a firm hand on Alex's shoulder. "Don't take it too hard," he said lightly. "Everyone loses control once in a while. The trick is learning from it." With that, they walked off the stage together, Melania leading, Trump following a step behind, protective but proud. Backstage, the hallway buzzed with whispers. Assistants, camera operators, and security staff parted as the couple passed. Reporters waiting near the exit raised microphones immediately. "Mrs. Trump, what made you speak so boldly tonight?" one called out. Melania paused briefly, her gaze calm. "Because silence has limits," she said softly. "And sometimes, when truth is mocked, silence becomes weakness." The lines struck like lightning. Phones recorded, cameras flashed, and before the hour was over, her words were already spreading across social media. Trump watched with a grin. "You know, that's going to be on every headline tomorrow." Melania gave him a sidelong glance. "Then perhaps they will learn something." The next morning, the headlines were relentless. Melania silences host in viral interview. Trump's calm response after Melania's verbal masterclass. Silence has limits. The First Lady's unexpected lesson in grace. Clips of the exchange flooded every major network and platform. Talk shows replayed the moment Trump walked onto the stage. Commentators dissected Melania's demeanor, her tone, her words. Some called it the most poised television moment of the decade. Others simply said, "She won." But to Melania, it wasn't about winning. She sat by the window of their Manhattan residence the next morning, coffee in hand, watching the city hum below. Trump entered quietly, holding a stack of newspapers. "You've officially broken the internet," he said with a chuckle. Melania smiled faintly. It was not the goal. He sat beside her. Maybe not, but it was the result. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence. Then Trump added, "You know what I liked most? You didn't raise your voice once. You didn't insult him. You just told the truth." Melania nodded. "Anger is loud. Truth is steady." Trump grinned. "You're better at this than I ever was." Melania turned to him, her eyes soft. "You fought with words that echoed. I fight with words that settle." Meanwhile, in a different apartment across town, Alex Grant sat alone in his dimly lit living room. The city lights outside felt distant, almost accusatory. His television replayed the interview on loop. Every smirk, every forced laugh, every jab, they all looked uglier now. But it wasn't Melania's calm rebuttals that haunted him most. It was Trump's final words. "Mockery doesn't build anything. Respect does." He muted the TV and leaned back, covering his face with his hands. His career had been built on cleverness, but tonight had shown him how empty that cleverness really was. He opened his laptop to find thousands of comments flooding his social media feeds. Melania showed more class than this host ever will. Alex Grant just learned a lesson in humility. Mockery is weakness. She's right. Some were harsh, others honest, but all had one message: the world had shifted. Alex closed his laptop and sat in silence for a long time. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about ratings or retweets. He was thinking about respect, the one thing he'd taken for granted. He picked up a pen and paper. After a long pause, he began to write. 1 week later, at the White House, a letter arrived, addressed to Melania. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Dear Mrs. Trump, I want to thank you. You showed me what strength really looks like. I built my career mocking others, thinking it made me clever. But watching you that night, I realized it only made me small. You were right. Laughter without kindness is cruelty. I will do better. Alex Grant. Melania read the letter quietly, then handed it to Trump. He raised an eyebrow. He wrote this? She nodded. People can change when they see themselves clearly. Trump chuckled. You didn't just silence him, you reformed him. Melania shook her head. No, he chose to change. I only reminded him he could. Trump leaned back, looking at her with admiration. You know, they called me the tough one, but you're tougher than I ever was. She smiled faintly. Not tougher, just quieter. He grinned. That's even scarier. Weeks later, Melania was invited to speak at a global leadership conference in Washington. The room was filled with politicians, executives, and journalists. Cameras lined the back walls. When she took the stage, the crowd fell silent. She wore white again, the same color she'd worn during the interview. Her voice was soft but clear. Leadership is not about speaking the loudest, she began. It is about listening. It is about knowing when to stay silent, and when silence becomes weakness. She paused, scanning the faces before her. In a world where it is easy to mock, easy to laugh, and easy to divide, let us remember that laughter fades, but respect builds. The room erupted in applause. Some stood immediately. Others followed, slower as her words sank deeper. In the front row, Trump clapped proudly, his expression softer than anyone had ever seen it. Later, as they walked backstage together, he leaned close. You know, he said, they invited me first. I told them they were asking the wrong Trump. Melania smiled. You were right. Months later, the interview was still trending online. School programs referenced it when teaching public speaking. Commentators replayed the moment when Melania silenced the laughter with one sentence. Laughter without kindness is cruelty. Even years later, that line lived on. Trump often joked about it during events. They came to mock her, he'd say proudly, but they left respecting her. Melania never responded to those comments. She didn't need to. Her silence, as always, said enough. At home one evening, Trump found her in the garden, watching the sunset. You know, he said, the night you went on that show, I was ready to jump in from the start. I know, she said softly. But I waited, he continued, and I watched you, and I realized the world finally saw what I've known all along. What is that? That you're the strong one. Melania smiled faintly. Strength takes many forms. You lead with noise, I lead with quiet, but both can change the world. Trump slipped his arm around her shoulders. We make a good team, don't we? She looked out at the horizon. The best kind, one that listens and one that speaks. The sky deepened into gold and violet, the city lights flickering awake in the distance. And somewhere, in that glow, the memory of that fateful night still lingered. not as mockery, not as controversy, but as a moment of truth. Because in the end, it was never about the jokes, the ratings, or the headlines. It was about respect, the quiet power that outlasts laughter. And long after the applause faded, that truth remained. Respect is stronger than mockery. Always. This is Classroom, revealing the untold side of power. Subscribe and never miss a story that makes the world listen.